Storytelling emerged with us. It's our longest tradition and oldest necessity to share pieces of ourselves, to create records of our beliefs and experiences, and then share them to incite connection and dialogue. Stories require a person's voice, a platform to share, and a listening ear. But I fear that in a world in which we have so many opportunities to share our perspectives, we've forgotten to listen to others. These stories give images to ideas, faces to change, and they've given me a purpose. There are so many stories to tell, and so many to hear. So join me as we delve into current issues and foster conversation by speaking through stories.
The term refugee refers to a migrant who arrived in the U.S. after fleeing persecution and/or violence in his or her home country. By this nationally accepted definition, the very people who colonized America were refugees, fleeing religious persecution under British rule. A nation built on those seeking asylum, who in recent rhetoric and policy changes has begun to turn away people pleading for the very same. One of my first stops to discover the raw truth behind refugees and the current refugee resettlement process was Wilbur Cross High School. Here, over 3,000 people gathered to participate in the 10th annual Run for Refugees. Gabriella Xavier, a second-generation American herself, sang the national anthem to start off the race, saying it is more than a song, but rather values our nation must return to.
Land of the free and the home of the brave, which is, what America is. And with everything that's going on right now, I feel like we should really look up to that. We're here to do what we do. We're here to help.
A helping nation, a nickname America was always proud of, shown in the rich history of peace talks and global intervention. America once led the world in admittance of those fleeing persecution, another important title we were set to maintain in the coming years. Yet, after recent elections and legal immigration pushback, that has all changed.
Well, I think we've unfortunately gone backwards with our current administration and not wanting to welcome refugees, but to put up walls of refugees. And personally, that makes me very sad.
Many controversial discussions and policies have been brought up in the recent administration that points toward regression in refugee resettlement rather than progression.
So we kind of solidified nationally our approach towards refugee resettlement in this country in 1980. From the beginning, it was very much like a bipartisan kind of issue in that, like, both parties were enthusiastic about resettling refugees. It was something that America has done for a long time, and we codified it. And it was like, look, if you're having a difficult time in your other countries, if your life is at stake, if your safety is at risk, then this is a place where you can come and kind of get your life started over again. And that was the situation through multiple presidencies, be it like Clinton or Reagan or Bush. It kind of was an issue that wasn't such a partisan kind of football thing. But what we've seen in the recent past is kind of that's unfortunately what it's become. Like many subjects right now in the United States, it's become like enmeshed in this partisan debate, which is unfortunate because I think it's something that speaks to people no matter kind of what political background that they come from. And it's something to be proud of, honestly, if you're an American, that like this is a country where people see it as a safe haven and people see it as the place where they're able to start their lives over.
For this story to be told, I needed to go straight to the heart of the issue. The Karajas, a Syrian family of 5, fled oppression and violence, only to start an even longer journey with many setbacks and many struggles. They have been Connecticut residents for over a year now, and I can think of no other way to share their journey with you other than through their own eyes and words.
Even though Syria was supposedly a republic, it was run more as a dictatorship that was inherited from father to son. And they ensured that the people there did not have any of their rights except those given to them by the ruler. Anyone who would complain about whether it's things that they said or their work or somebody else who was in a position of authority, they would basically disappear for weeks into the government interrogation system. They grew up in a generation where their parents had basically drilled it in their minds that they would not to question the government because they had survived the war in the 80s. And this was all before any kind of social media or worldwide news, and all the things that happened in Syria basically stayed in. And the whole generation that grew up after that was basically one where they insisted on just towing the line and not trying to do anything that would upset the status. New generation that grew up in Syria started to push back against this, and they decided that they wanted some change, and they went up against the ruling government. New generation, they started to use a little bit more social media, being able to let people know what was going on in the different villages and towns and cities, and they were able to start getting some consensus of people together to say we need some changes. First demands from the people before the full revolution was just to get their basic rights. They weren't asking for any kind of government change. The ruling government's response was to just decide to completely try to control it. They sent in the army to control the people, and a lot of people were killed, and they did not realize that this was a different time and people had ways to communicate with each other and let other people know what was really happening inside the individual villages. So that caused them to have to rebel because people were losing their siblings, family members, and this caused an uprising from within the people. The internal government was starting to fracture. There's a lot of people leaving the military as they found out that their family was getting targeted. And it was almost a change point. And then there was some outside soldiers who came in from outside countries that helped the Syrian government retain control. That's when the government really stepped up their campaign, and there was a lot more bombing, and whole neighborhoods just wiped out in single attacks. That's what started the refugee movement, people just realizing that staying on was futile, and they just started going out anywhere where they could cross borders into any country. So he decided to send his wife and the children ahead to his father-in-law who lived in Turkey at that point. So he was able to get them across the border using smugglers who were running across the borders. And at that time, he didn't have enough money for all of them, so he stayed behind working. And then he was able to reunite with them a few months later. They crossed in winter, so it was snow and cold and sleet. And of course, it's all muddy fields, and they're crossing with children. Their youngest was basically still a baby on her arm, so it was quite a challenge to go through that. And then as they got across with their children, she went back to help some of the other children who were trying to cross across too. So it was more than just her own family. He joined them about a month later once he was able to get across. And they were at that point staying in a house that her father had rented from a neighbor's, and they were at least able to have a roof over them and to be able to be together as a family. When he got there, it was basically each one of their neighbors around them, some providing bedding, blankets, different people getting food, just trying to help these families to be able to survive. So he started at that point looking for work in Turkey so he could be able to provide for his family. He was able to get work in Turkey, working on different construction projects that were going on just as a day laborer, being paid daily. At that point, once he had the job, he was able to provide an apartment for them where they were at least able to move and be together and to be able to provide some of their needs. At the same time, the Turkish government started recording the refugees and providing them some of the assistances that were coming in from the international community. At that time, the United Nations allowed them to start registering for immigration, to immigrate to different countries, and they were able to register at that time, not knowing where they would go. 6 months after registering, he was contacted by the United Nations and They asked him if he had a specific country in mind. He said he would go anywhere with the family as long as they felt safe. By that point, the war in Syria had progressed enough where they realized, because of who was in the area that they were from, that they would never be able to go back to Syria. So they knew that they had to look outside of Syria for the rest of their life and for their children. A few months later, they contacted him again and offered that the U.S. is enrolling refugees, and asked him if he would like to be considered for that. And he had heard enough about the options and the opportunity there, and he wanted to be able to have that to offer to his children. And that started the routine of every couple months long interviews at the embassy, providing information and just history and recounting their journey. So in the interim time, his wife was pregnant. They had a baby, but they lost him during that period. And then the last couple months, they realized that things were progressing well. And after losing their youngest child, they realized there wasn't much for them left in Turkey at that point. So when they were told that they had about a month left in Turkey before they came, they were really getting excited about a new start. It was a challenge because they had lost a lot of friends in Turkey, and leaving people that they had met, and at the same time knowing that they were going to something completely unknown. They knew the reputation of the U.S. as welcoming and open, but there's so much that you have to start thinking about when you think about starting a new life. They were expecting it to be a very long and rigorous process just getting out of the airport, similar to their experiences in Syria and traveling in Turkey. But they were met by the IOM, and they took care of all their paperwork inside and took care of their luggage and everything, and just walked them straight out of the airport. When they finished all the proceedings, the representative from the IOM, the agency, basically told them their van was here waiting to take them. And when he walked them to the van, it was a black van, very similar to the ones that the Syrian regime uses to arrest people. And it really was not what they were expecting coming in. And that caused them the most concern after that flight. They didn't have a choice, so they got on board. At that point, they got onto the van and they started driving. The kids fell asleep. Alia couldn't sleep. He was dozing in and out. It was about 2.5 to almost 3 hour trip. So at that time, the driver pulled into that lot and stopped and opened the door, and they were met by the group welcoming them from Hebron and holding the sign in Arabic. And at that point, once Alia saw the sign in Arabic, she felt like she was somewhere safe. So they finally got them to a house where they were supposed to rest for the night. So they spent the night, and they actually thought it was one of the committee members. And they wouldn't let the kids touch anything because they were afraid they would break something on there. And they really wasn't expecting that this would be the place that was made for them. And then the next day, the whole committee came back, and they were able to meet a lot of different people, including yourself and your family, and having a full meal prepared for them, and being able to start realizing that all these things around them were actually going to be theirs.
I had the chance to sit down with the organization that resettled the Karajas and many refugee families here in Connecticut, IRIS, Integrated Refugee and Immigrant Services. They've been doing this for a long time and have resettled thousands of refugees here in Connecticut. Since entering the White House in January 2017, President Trump has issued executive orders to cut the refugee admission ceiling for 2017 from 110,000 to 50,000. He also called for the refugee resettlement program to be suspended for 120 days. The federal court challenged these policies and blocked them from being proceeded with. Although there were still significantly low numbers of refugees accepted during 2017 and continues to drop this year.
The past, I would say, 4 years have seen some of the biggest swings in this regard.
This This year, we saw the Executive Order 13,780 protecting the nation from foreign terrorist entry into the United States, furthering these restrictions and lowering the frequency of Syrians entering. Also, the Trump administration attempted to pass a policy that grants state and local jurisdiction a significant role in the vetting and resettlement process, allowing them to determine refugee placement in their jurisdictions. These efforts are still continued on their end.
Because of all of the kind of bureaucratic complications in these different iterations of travel bans, we'll probably see fewer than 45,000 this year. What we've seen here at IRIS, how has that played out? I mean, on the very basic level, our arrivals have slowed down like precipitously. It's a board where we have our upcoming arrivals, which is probably blank right now, which had not been usual beforehand. So the arrivals have been fewer. And they've been coming from fewer countries. We traditionally have resettled volunteers from Syria, Iraq, Somalia, Sudan, Congo, Eritrea, Afghanistan, a whole array of different countries. And what we've seen in the past 2 or 3 months, we've almost exclusively received families from Afghanistan. Just because of all the different rules and regulations that have been put into place. What's gotten less attention are the kind of other things that have been going on. So there have been regulations imposed on the vetting process to make it even more difficult than it already was, and kind of other restrictions imposed on family reunifications and things like this that have also slowed down resettlement considerably. So it's definitely been on people's minds, and even created uncertainty about how long their welcome will be here, and if there will be a time when they'll be, asked or told to leave, or what are their legal rights, especially in the 5 years before they attain citizenship. I know that after the election, I can think of probably 2 families that I know of that just went to make sure all their passports and documents were in order in case it just became a situation they felt like they had to step away from. So, and that's kind of really upsetting.
These policy sentiments are not anything new, with huge cuts to immigration being the very basis of the Trump and Pence campaign. In fact, Mike Pence, as governor of Indiana from 2013 to 2017, was known to flat out refuse refugees coming into his state for resettlement, and was known to once reroute a Syrian refugee family already on a plane to Indiana. He exclaimed that he did not want them and forced the local refugee resettlement organization in Connecticut to take them in due to their unwelcome status in Indiana. Pence now serves as the Vice President of the United States under Trump. Consequently, the administration is still advocating for states' rights to turn away people in this way and pressing the long-time agenda of Pence.
I think that in a deeper sense, the question of welcoming refugees is tied in with the value that people place on living in a kind of a diverse country with people from lots of different backgrounds and experiences. Looking at it as I do from the perspective of the kids, and I'm so often in the classrooms in the public schools where these kids are, just to see their interactions with other kids in their classroom, and it's less tangible, but to see, to go into a classroom and there's Spanish-speaking kids, there's just like homegrown American kids, there's kids from Syria and Congolese kids, and they're all kind of hanging out with each other and learning each other's languages and being exposed to one another just from the beginning. I mean, partly why I got into teaching and I love public schools is because that's the best of what public schools do, is they welcome all and they really give kids an exposure to all these different walks of life. So it's, in a way, that's having kids grow up not just like aware of different cultures, because in fact, when I when I grew up, I went to schools that were not super diverse. So like learning about other cultures was like, knowing that like, oh, some people celebrate Ramadan at this time of year, and you learn a little bit about a holiday, but you're not kind of interacting with people from those cultures on a daily basis. And I think that really helps widen kids' perspective and point of views, seeing the different ways different people perceive the world, interact with the world and other people, makes you look deeply at yourself and at how you do those things. Also just makes you aware of all the different options and ways for interacting with other people and seeing the world there are. So in a greater sense, it kind of opens up ways of looking at the world that might not have been open if you're just kind of like stuck in your own kind of cultural situation.
Interestingly enough, a Pew Research Center survey from April and May 2017 demonstrated this. The biggest factor associated with warmer feelings toward Trump was the sentiment that, quote, a growing number of newcomers from other countries threatens U.S. values, end quote. This only demonstrates that the recent administration's campaign exploited nationalistic concerns and fear of difference in cultures, which we have seen translate into current restrictive orders on refugee placement.
The rhetoric around kind of fear and uncertainty, which has, certainly been growing since 9/11. The rhetoric that's been put out there has kind of gotten in the way of people understanding where refugees come from and what they've been through to get here. We have seen a greater number of kids kind of getting bullied or teased in school here in New Haven, where that kind of used to be much more rare. It's become a little bit more common. And again, there's no way to connect that directly to the kind of national dialogue right now, but it seems connected to us. People who I've met who are, opposed to resettling refugees, that's usually kind of what it comes down to, is like this idea that it's somehow an unsafe process and puts our country in danger. That's something that if you can sit down and have a conversation about, you can kind of hopefully lead people to understand like how many resources there are in our countries right now, how resilient refugees are, and how quickly they actually are putting back into the economy and not taking out of the economy. So it's a question of delivering information to people that they might not have been exposed to, and I think that's reflective and emblematic of multiple issues that are going on right now between social media and all these different news channels where everyone, and this is not a left or right, conservative or liberal thing, it's, most of us are getting information from one or two sources that generally reflect our own views and make us feel good about ourselves. I think it's a question of like having people find sources of information that are like fact-based and verifiable, and might like destroy some of those assumptions that they have. There are millions, 20 million or more refugees around the world right now. Fewer than 1% of those will be resettled anywhere in the world, much less the United States. You have to go through this rigorous vetting process that takes usually around 2 years, oftentimes longer than that. And speaking with our clients who have been through the process, and even with people who, who do that process themselves on the State Department side, it's a really rigorous process, and everyone involved is invested in having it stay that way, because God forbid somehow the process fails, that puts the whole refugee resettlement program in jeopardy.
It was very full and very detailed, and any country that's opening their doors to have refugees coming in from outside should do the due diligence and the full vetting to ensure that the people coming in are who they are and who they say they are, so that there's no problems.
Looking back at the many millions of refugees who have been resettled since 1980, how many acts of fatal terrorism have been committed by refugees since the beginning of the program in 1980, and it's zero. Refugees are required to repay in full the price of their airline passage to the United States, and which a lot of people just don't know. And the idea behind that is to signal to refugee families from day one that, like, look, this resettlement, it's not a handout, it's like a hand up, and it's not a free ride, literally not a free ride. Once you arrive in this country, you'll be expected as soon as possible to support yourselves and your family, and to kind of give back into the society. So that tends to be the story of refugees in the United States. They arrive here, and of course, as anyone arriving in like another country with very few resources would, they need some pretty intense support, especially for the first kind of 90-day period. And the support there is like rent subsidies and kind of food and furniture, which we supply as donated furniture. They need to work with caseworkers and other people to help them find jobs, to help get their kids into school, and help them negotiate all the kind of different bureaucratic and logistical things that they need to do. So they tend to be, pretty needing of that support for the first 90 days and a little bit after that. But the various kind of longer term studies that have been done on refugees in general show that refugees are more likely even than other immigrant populations to open their own businesses, employ others in their community, and again, like if you want to look at it purely in kind of a monetary sense, refugees over the long term end up paying more in taxes than the cost of resettling them. So if you're looking at it through that one very narrow lens, the idea that kind of refugees are costing us somehow as a society just doesn't really play out.
Through their efforts, the staff at IRIS have realized that people often have an image of who a refugee is. However, they have found that refugees come from many walks of life.
I think in a lot of people's minds they see images perhaps that they've seen on TV of people who are super destitute and coming across borders with only the kind of clothes on their backs and stuff, and that is one story of refugees for sure, but not the only story. Many refugees come here because the specific reason why they've been threatened is they've worked abroad with U.S. military services, and I think that's something that we don't hear a lot about, and is also a reason why, especially among veterans, you often see a lot of support for refugees, because they understand that the reason these families ended up with targets on their back was because they were translating abroad or helping military services abroad.
The resettlement process can be a very hopeful and exciting one for everyone involved, but Mr. Wilson points out that there are difficult aspects as well.
It's not all hey, this is great, you're here now and you're safe. It's not all happiness. It's knowing that this family is in a new place and one part of their journey is over, but another, often very difficult part, is beginning. For a lot of families, it's that first night in their home is really where it sinks in that this is their new home and they're not going back anytime soon to where they were. So more often than not, what happens with the clients I interact with is that there's just little moments here and there where something will come up. A story will come out, and more often than not, it's a positive story, and it's this reminds me about being in my old neighborhood and my neighbor that we used to go to every day and talk with, so I think that what stands out are how those moments surface and kind of what they say about the strength of just human kind of connection and how strong that can be, how enduring that is, and how it can be brought to the surface by like a sound or a smell or a memory like that, and how embedded in all of us kind of that sense of place and connection is.
This sense of connection is something we all need, but it is also something many refugees struggle to find in a new nation and culture. Feelings
of kind of like isolation, you know, when they first arrive, especially if there's a language barrier. I think one of the main frustrations is not being able to kind of express themselves in the way that like reflects their intelligence and curiosity. The children of the Karaja family have taken on language barriers and prioritize communication skills due to this reality.
When I first came, you know, when you first go to school and you don't know how to speak English, it'd be a little difficult. That's why I learned the English fast, and I want to make more friends and understand to them. And AJ and Jovan helped me like a lot to teach me English too.
The kids were enthusiastic to talk about their journey to America.
When we figured out we were gonna come, and we was excited and nervous. When we first came, we wasn't know nobody. Then I just saw my friend, the friend they was like playing around in my neighborhood. Then they just saw me and they came up and they said, if you want to play with us, then we just start playing and stuff.
Simplicity of children, not allowing cultural differences to get in the way of just playing. As you can see, in such a short amount of time, they have learned English and picked up on cultural norms. Although they maintain and cherish many traditions from Syria, they have found a balance as well. When asked about favorite American foods, the littlest Karaja lit up and was quick to say,
I want fries and chicken nugget and pizza and everything.
I think we can find more similarity than difference in that statement. And with so many other things we share in common, if only willing to look. Reverend Denise Esslinger, a local pastor at the Gilead Congregational Church, led a group of passionate individuals to co-sponsor the Karaja family. I was a part of that group, and I can tell you that the process is long, it's difficult, but it is very exciting as well. I wanted to sit down and have a conversation with her specifically to see what she got out of her relationship with the Karaja family. Pastor Denise did experience some opposition when first introducing the idea of the congregation co-sponsoring a refugee family's resettlement.
I mean, I did have a conversation with some people who said that they felt that, you know, that there's a lot of concerns in our own country and a lot of people that need help, and that should be more of a priority in helping veterans and others than this. And I think, you know, that's certainly a valid concern, that there are people, there's so much need. And again, even as a community of faith, we have to make decisions about how we are feeling.
So they decided on this calling and went forward with the long process of putting clothing, transportation, employment, education, housing, and much more in place for the incoming family.
I think that there were certainly bumps along the way. There was difficulty in finding housing initially. Then, you know, I think, again, we saw God's movement along the way, that eventually the apartment that they ended up, I mean, there were, my understanding, some people who said no, they did not want a refugee family living in the apartment that they had to rent.
Although they found that there were people that were quick to react in this way, they also learned firsthand that humanity always overrules on the surface differences.
The idea of just, if we have the opportunity to sit down and meet someone and talk to them, whether they be a Muslim or whether they be a refugee or whether they be somebody who's gay or transgendered or of a different race, that we share much more in common than we do in differences.
This experience busted many stereotypes for all involved, such as the perception that migrants are often in some way lazy or overly reliant on government support.
You know, I know that that is a real tension in our country right now, and the Karajas do receive generous health care benefits from our country and have also received financial support. I mean, I guess for me, I don't think that's the question. Isn't for me why they shouldn't have it, but why doesn't everyone who needs that kind of support. And I know when you're talking in huge numbers of people that there have to be, you know, cut off somewhere, and it's not, rarely can be that individual. Well, Skylar, what is it that you need? Tell me about your life, and where are you, and how can we be supportive that you can do everything and achieve the potential of the person God's created you to be. I mean, ideally, that's how it would be. I know with the Karaja family that they, you know, want to work hard, and they want to have a home for their family and be able to live in peace. Ahmed was just like wanted to work like right from day one. It was all about, you know, I want to work and get me a job, and he, you know, really did not care what kind of work it was. You know, he wanted to make money and contribute.
Throughout the process of resettlement, those involved found that they were more aware of their own preconceptions.
You know what, here's one of my favorite stories with the Karaja family, which is about my own prejudice, because where they live in Mayfair, it's a closer neighborhood than we live out here in Hebron. And, you know, I was very worried for them, and we were, you know, told by Iris to be just very careful about their safety and not share their name and pictures and where they live in case there were people who would not be welcoming of them. But overall, I would say that's not the experience that they've received, and that by and large that they've received a real welcome here by people and by their neighbors. And it was probably within the first couple of months, and we were at their house for something, and I looked across the street at the house across the street, and there were American flags and "Don't tread on me." And, you know, I said something about like, so how has it been with your neighbors? And they've been, oh, good, 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 good. And I was kind of wondering, you know, I bet those people, I'm worried about them and how they're going to treat them. And then heard that, you know, in one of the first snowstorms, they came over and snow blowed their driveway and have reached out to them. And that they've been very welcoming of them. And so in my own prejudices, I made assumptions about people who, you know, and I think it said, God bless America outside their house. So I jumped to the conclusion that they were conservative and that they would not be welcoming of them, and I was wrong. So, you know, I always love it when my own stereotypes are busted and I make assumptions about people that turn out not to be true.
Pastor Denise also spoke of the kids' appreciation and passion to learn.
You know, I think that we've seen both I and Noel get Student of the Month, and I know that even was recognized this year in kindergarten, which is so awesome, which I think speaks to their desire and willingness to learn.
They spoke with the same exhilaration for these educational opportunities when explaining to me what an American education and their many Student of the Month accomplishments meant to them.
I worked really hard for it. Yeah, then my teacher saw me like I'm working hard for it, for getting it. Then I just got it. I was really surprised.
Yeah. When Mr. Gordon and Miss Flynn they say Student of the Month, we run to the house and say, we're so excited, we got Student of the Month.
I hope to like be good at school and like get used to it, then to be a doctor or something.
My dreams, I say I'm gonna go read and be doctor. He wants to be dentist doctor and I want to be normal doctor.
And when asked what their priority is here in America, the Karajas always respond the same.
To educate our children, because when he left Syria for his children.
Wow, what a journey. To go through the life of a refugee with the Karaja family and be able to have conversations where I received all these different perspectives on the issue. I thought I knew what I was talking about going in. I thought I was well researched, but I don't think I could have ever researched the hurt and the trauma and the pain and the displacement, the feeling of not having a home. I don't think I could have ever researched that. I don't think that's something you can put in words. And I was so surprised by how vulnerable and open the Karajas were willing to be. But I'm so grateful for that, and I'm so grateful to be able to share that with people. These are the conversations that are needed. We need to be listening to the refugees. As amazing as it was to talk to Iris and to talk to Pastor Denise and so many other professionals, I had to talk to the Karajas to truly know what the Karajas were going through. We are so quick to define the term refugee. In fact, I started this package with defining the term refugee. But in order to truly know what that word means, what that life entails, what that journey entails, you have to talk to the refugees themselves. They have to be able to take back that word and redefine it. They have to be able to say, this is not an ugly word. This is not a tragic word. I truly can't explain how heartbreaking it was to hear them tell the tale of going from Syria to Turkey and Turkey to the US. But it's even more heartbreaking to me that at times they don't feel like this nation is welcoming them. At times they feel like our rhetoric is that refugees are bad, a bad connotation to the word refugees. I'm sorry, but I can't sit and have a conversation with these people, and I hope that you can't sit and watch this screen and what they have shared with you and be able to say that they don't deserve our help, that they don't deserve a place in our nation. I think that they are the epitome of what citizens are. They are the epitome of people who want to give back to this nation, who are excited about this nation. In recent times, we have seen great policy change in refugees, which is something I was excited to talk about and really delve into. The Obama administration started off in 2016 with 85,000 aspirational number of refugees to bring into this nation. He then decided to take that from 85,000 to 110,000 refugees. It was the time of the Syrian refugee crisis beginning. It was the height of it all. There were so many people who were seeking support. I think that it's truly, truly a testament to our nation that we were able to set that, and that Iris was able to bring in so many people at that time. Yet, in recent administrations, we've gone backwards. We've regressed from that 110,000 refugees, and I would like to point out people with faces and stories and similarities and cultures. People coming and seeking asylum in our nation. He moved that down from 110,000 to 50,000.
It makes me sad that immigrants are seen often as people to be feared than people to be welcomed. You know, personally, I feel that we are a country that was built on immigration, and I know that we no longer live in a time where anybody can come to this country, that there are quotas of people from different countries and that sort of stuff. But I guess just as a person of faith, I feel that we're called to welcome the strangers.
The opportunity to kind of see America like at its best. It's like the idea, if you are at all enamored of the idea of the American dream, you see it here every week when you're working with families. So you get to follow the process of families with honestly no other option to live a safe life, who have had the opportunity to come here, and just from day one are excited to be here, like oftentimes just like way more excited about America and the opportunities that are here than kind of the average person. Like that's the lens through which I see it, is that it's just a great opportunity to see like kind of the best of what a community can do to help a family, and then the best of what that family can do to like give back to the community. I
would say the thing that has struck me the most about them, that I've learned for them, is the idea of, you know, gratitude, that everything that they have been through in their life of having to leave their family behind and leave their home behind, and is that there's people who live with gratitude. And it's been such a lesson for me, and I'll get emotional as I talk about this, because, you know, many in this country, not everyone, have so much and forget.
In fact, Ahmed wanted to be sure that his words of gratitude were included in this segment.
He wants to especially thank anyone who is listening, who was part of this journey, to say very much a deep thank you, and great hope that he would one day be able to, as a family, be able to repay these people one by one. They have allowed them to have their family back here and to have their connections and to establish a new life.
With the topic of refugee resettlement, fear of difference often comes up in discussion. And this fear manifests itself into both physical and metaphorical walls meant to divide us.
Flames of division are being encouraged in the days that we live in.
But the Karajas and their story are a true testament to how humanity connects us all.
He is a person the same way like the other person is a person, and that when he's talking to them, they're basically just two humans talking to each other. His story is the same as the story of anyone else if they were in his same position. And that people have to think that we are all one people, and we're all basically one family. And that, you know, in the end, we all want the same thing for our families and our children.
While this definition of refugee may be true,
living in fear constantly and always expecting the worst.
the Karajas are excited for the chance to redefine their lives in a safe and welcoming nation.
The past is part of who they are, but also they want to look towards the future.
I hope you will take the time to reflect on these stories. And if you feel called to learn more or help in any way, you can reach out to me at speakingthroughstories@gmail.com or visit www.irisct.org.
We're always looking for interns and volunteers here if people happen to be in and around New Haven. There are, volunteer tutors placed at schools throughout the city. There are cultural companions who are paired up with individuals or families on kind of a more friendship-based level to help their new neighbors kind of navigate all the weird cultural things about New Haven and America and help them figure things out that can be difficult to learn on your own.
The Karajas and many other refugees have been on the run for a long time. Maybe it's time we as a nation join their team and help them to the finish line. This has been Speaking Through Stories with Skylar Haynes.